Okay. Hello, everyone. So my presentation covers how the pandemic has changed education. So here's a little overview of what I'll be covering throughout this presentation. So to start, I talk about the specific impact that the pandemic had on high school students. So I'll discuss the impact it had on high school students, along with high school teachers, extracurricular activities, and really high schools as a whole. Um, so, throughout this presentation, I'll go into detail about the specific ways that the pandemic changed students' learning. So, how students are learning, um, the different methods that students must take to absorb the information that they're learning now online, primarily, as opposed to in person. I also talk about some of the positive outcomes of the pandemic, um, specifically related to education. Um, I also discuss how the pandemic changed a teacher's approach. So, how professors and teachers throughout the pandemic were forced to alter the ways that they conducted their lessons, their lectures, um, primarily, especially in these online courses. So the pandemic really changed the way that we learn, students learn, but also how teachers approach um, teaching these students new information. The old method of um, lecture, test, quiz, lecture, test might not always work in these online courses. So I discuss just the way in which teachers had to change their approach to these online classes during the pandemic. Now, I also talk about the online tools that both students and teachers must be aware of to thrive in this new setting that we have never experienced before. There's a lot of new technology that both students and teachers had to learn how to utilize, including Zoom and a lot of the new updates on Canvas as we switch from Blackboard. So, lastly, I talk about just the loss of structure and routine as a result of the pandemic. I firmly believe that the educational system not only does it place a big emphasis on academics, but that it develops structure and routine in a young adult's life. All right. So to start, COVID's impact on high schools. So high school has always been much more than just academics. High school is a time where individuals form new friendships. And I believe this is extremely important, especially for high school freshmen. COVID forced students to learn at home. Studies have shown that this significantly impacted high school freshmen' ability to make new friends. Friendships that are made in a student's freshman year often last a very long time, and I believe this is very important. I know me personally, I have friendships from my freshman year of high school that I still call my best friends today, and I'm sure 10 years down the road I'll still be great friends with them. So I feel that the pandemic really impacted an incoming freshman from developing these new friendships. So additionally, high school is also a time where young adults learn to communicate with both teachers and other classmates that are outside of their immediate family. And I feel that this is very important because this allows these high schoolers, and this is a quote from the Child, Adolescents, and Behavioral Health Organization. They say that this allows these high schoolers to be exposed to a variety of different cultures, perspectives, and ways of living that may be different than their own. So if you're talking to your family every day, you develop a sense of security in that conversation and you know them well. But it's also important to have relationships and communicate with people outside your immediate family so you develop new perspectives and ideas and you grow as a result. So, additionally, switching over to extracurricular activities and how they were impacted by COVID. We know that these extracurricular activities were impacted by school closures due to the pandemic. So many student athletes lost a year of eligibility, which will impact their college offers in the future. And I have a quote here that says, new Harvard research suggests feelings of social isolation are on the rise and that those hardest hit are older teens and young adults. So this noticeable trend that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused is a feeling of loneliness and isolation in a lot of these young adults. And these extracurricular activities were a way for individuals to try new activities, form new friendships, and play sports they love. It's often a time where people look forward to these activities after school, and they use it as a way to get away from, the stressful life that many individuals live. So this idea that extracurricular activities were closed and students lost a year of eligibility was a very big deal, and it impacted a lot of young students in high school. So switching over to students learning, the way that students have learned for decades was changed forever due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Students were forced to immediately convert to online learning, and this resulted in many lower income students falling behind due to a variety of reasons. Now, some of these reasons include a lack of technology at home or the proper space in home to focus on their studies. So as this pandemic started and began to increase with regulations throughout 2020, many parents were also forced to work at home, which created crowded households. And a lot of the time, low-income students were mainly affected because low-income students were unable to utilize the same technology that other students had, whether that be not being able to use a computer at home because your parent is home working and that's the only computer in the house, or if there's just simply not a quiet place for you to do your studies at home. So this disproportionately affected lower income students. Now, this transition from in-person learning with set times and schedules to online learning that consists of many asynchronous courses like this one resulted in a loss of structure and routine for many students. One of the many benefits of our school system in the United States is that they provide students with routines and structure, which is extremely important to learn at a young age. Structure and routine prepare students for their adult life. I believe that in many instances, the pandemic stopped these traits from continuing to be developed in these young individuals. Structure and routine from the school system is something that is extremely important to learn at a young age. And I believe that this sets you up for a successful life in the future because you will always need structure and routine to perform well, whether that be waking up on time and getting there at a specific time to work every day, or just knowing your functions throughout a week that you must continue to do. And this is developed by the school system with the set times, due dates, all that is set up in a way to create this structure and routine in young individuals' minds. Now, here is a chart that I wanted to pull, and I got this from the Social Achievement Gap website. And this chart shows the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to increase the social gap, the social class achievement gap. And this is what I was just talking about on the previous slide about how low-income students were disproportionately affected due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you can see from this chart, these are the many reasons as to why this was the case. So things such as familiarity with digital tools. If a student does not have their own computer, or if they are not very familiar with technology, they are much more likely to not succeed than a student who has had a computer their whole life and knows these different web browsers, forms of technology, and knows how to navigate websites such as Canvas, where most of their work will need to be completed. And things such as access to digital tools and resources. This is something that I pointed out earlier too. The fact that many low-income students may not have this access to digital tools and resources that their peers do have. And this disproportionately impacts low-income communities and families, and creates a further gap in the social class in regard to education. Here's another chart that I felt was very important to put in my presentation, and this is from McKinsey.com. This shows the immediate impact that COVID-19 had on students' learning. And we can see, as it says, immediately after the spring shutdowns and throughout the summer of 2020, students in all age groups were falling behind. So as you can see from the trend, as soon as the COVID-19 pandemic began and impacted the educational system, there was an immediate drop in students falling behind. Students falling behind significantly rose in that period of time, 3 months behind, as you can see. And even as students began to go back to steady learning, you could see that that time would never be recovered. So students now 5 months behind in many instances, in many important subjects such as math, history, English literature, writing, and reading. This impacts students for years due to them falling behind other students who did not have to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, taking them out of physical learning, which we are all used to. Now, switching over to some of the positive outcomes of the pandemic, I want to preface this by saying we know the pandemic was a very deadly and scary and chaotic time that negatively impacted thousands of Americans and their families. However, there were also many positive outcomes on the education system, within the education system, that came about due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So one of the main positive outcomes consisted of a shift in how we utilize online courses and lectures in America. What I mean by this is that now more than ever, online classes are being offered in a variety of different courses that were previously not offered. In college, in high school, many online courses are now being offered, where previously these were only taught in person. This supports students who are going through hardships and cannot attend in-person courses, or students who cannot afford to pay for a year-long lease in the area around their school. So me personally, I only have one semester left of college, and I didn't want to spend money for a year-long lease in Richmond. So these online courses allowed me to be at home, save money, and also get the same form of education online. So I don't have to have a year-long lease spending money in Richmond. I'm able to use these online courses that came about due to COVID-19 to finish my college degree. So these are some of the benefits that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic in regard to education. So here's a quote that I have from Unincorporated, and it says, instructional course designers have been the unsung heroes during this challenging time, and we hope the value and contributions they bring to a university will be remembered well past the pandemic. So I found this interesting because these instructional course designers are tasked with redesigning courses and developing entire curriculums that support students. So the pandemic placed a huge burden on these individuals' backs. And as we know, these instructional course designers developed these curriculums, and these curriculums needed a complete revamp after the physical element was taken out of education. With everything being done online, curriculums needed a shift. So this changed in a lot of ways how curriculums are taught, the different tools that are utilized, and this is why a huge burden was placed on these instructional course designers' backs, and they paid a huge contribution. Now, how the pandemic changed teachers' approach. So, the cancellation of exams for older students and relaxing of formal assessments has offered educators time to rethink the necessity of assessments that can take a toll on children's well-being and constrict opportunities for learning. So this quote explains how the pandemic has caused our nation to rethink our education system in many ways. New teaching mechanisms such as Zoom allow students to collaborate with one another in a way that is similar to an in-person course. Teachers were forced to find new ways to keep students engaged during a very difficult and unusual time. So I find this very interesting because for many decades throughout our entire educational system, we've had a similar way of how many teachers and professors have a similar way in how they present material, whether that be lectures, tests, quizzes, all the above, etc. However, teachers' approach needed to change not entirely, but it needed to be altered with the introduction of these online courses, because simply lecturing for hours on end and then giving a test is not going to will not be in many ways the way that works and has students learning through an online course. We know throughout online courses that students are naturally less engaged, and on Zoom, many students turn their camera off and are not vocal. So teachers had to find new ways to engage students, and this revamp in our educational system, I believe, caused many positive outcomes and will continue to be a positive outcome for years to come. So, in conclusion, the pandemic showed the United States the many ways that we had gotten complacent in the educational system. So, the pandemic showed our nation that the educational system is much more than just academics. We learned how important of a role school systems play in helping students learn the importance of structure and routine in their daily lives. Therefore, I believe that the COVID-19 pandemic helped our educational system grow in many ways. Thank you very much. Here's my works cited. Thank you.